Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for joining us once again at Convicts and Cops. This episode will feature the criminal life of Raymond Shryock, better known to his Mexican Mafia carnales and the gang world as Huero Shy from Artesia. As of July of 2025, he has been a member of the Mariposa for 55 years and counting, a lifetime for many. Before we begin, how about a quick word from our sponsor? There is a way which seems right unto a man, but the end thereof are the ways of death. For certain, we all will surrender the ghost sometime in our journey of life. But spiritual death is something very horrible. This historical episode about Wero Shy is one that is ongoing because he still lives. I will cover his criminal beginnings in 1970 with his transfer to DVI, the Dual Vocational Institution in Tracy, California, also referred to by the youth offenders as the Gladiator School. From his recruitment into La M to his ultimate conviction and commitment to the feds in 1997, Huero Shy witnessed and participated in the evolution of the Mexican Mafia, the Gang of Gangs, which included a complete immersion into the world of darkness. Raymond Manes Shryock was born on July 16, 1951, directly descended from folks who hailed from the state of Kansas. Ironically, our Kansas City, Kansas, is where my mother was born in 1928. Like many young men and women of other ethnicities and backgrounds, Huero Shy was raised in one of countless Mexican-American communities that dot the landscape of Southern California. Although many in society and in law enforcement considered it unique and unusual for a Caucasian to belong to a Chicano street gang, Huero Shy became one of many gabachos, white guys, with a brown heart. He not only adapted to and adopted the Mexican culture, but he was also accepted into the Mexican gang culture, taking the well-worn path of the vatos locos, becoming proficient in calo, a Chicano street slang that succeeded in butchering two languages, English and Spanish. Like many of us who were state-raised and embarked upon the road of la vida loca, Huero Shy made many visits to juvenile hall, juvie we called it, forestry camps, and ultimately to the California Youth Authority. In July of 1970, while housed in CYA at the Dual Vocational Institution, the Gladiator School, he was convicted of assault with a deadly weapon and received his adult B number. In 1970, Richie Ruiz from Bakers, a founding member of La M in 1957, was housed at DVI. Sometime in the same year, 1970, he undertook the largest single recruitment in the history of the Mexican Mafia. Richie Ruiz would be responsible for the induction of what we called the Young Guns, about a dozen new young members. This included the following: Huero Shy, Alex Mo Farrell, Richard Baby Boy Resendez, Martin Keto Vargas, Donald Stoney Galas, Manuel Chapo Amaro, Richard Romy Galaviz, Raymond Chavo Perez, Ralph Pata Garcia, Raul Dagwood Vasquez, Daniel Spider Arriaga, and Arthur Artie Duran. So let's contrast this dramatic, bold, mass stroke of recruitment with today's practices. Back then, the OGs would recruit the worst of the worst with no self-serving agenda to worry about, just bringing in ferocious, violent talent to the fraternity. Today, with all the backstabbing and internal politicking, such a movida is strictly forbidden. On January 30th, 1972, at 4:15 p.m., in the DVI North Corridor leading to the recreation yard and mess hall, A melee broke out between what Associate Superintendent John Hacker described as 20 Mexican Americans from Northern and Southern California battling each other. He said this was the first disturbance of its kind. Up to this point, clashes amongst Chicanos were not classified as North versus South, but just as a disturbance amongst the Chicano population. Going forward, the battles would be described more and more often as battles between two distinct groups of Chicanos from Northern and Southern California. The polarization of North versus South had started to take shape. Huero Shy, always a frontline soldier, suffered a 5-inch laceration on his scalp behind his right ear. He also received puncture wounds on his lower left back. Luis Salcedo from Los Angeles suffered 3 puncture wounds in the chest and upper right shoulder. Both were admitted to the DVI hospital and described as being in satisfactory condition. 2 others suffered minor injuries and were treated and released from the hospital. 6 weapons made from screwdrivers, ladles, and bolts were found. After this incident, Wero Shy was transferred to San Quentin. Edward Salino Lopez was also known as Wero Green Eyes from Florencia 13, a newly made Mexican Mafia member. On May 30th, 1973, Wero Green Eyes was found face down, fully clothed, and with a towel covering his head in the shower at the west end of the San Quentin gym shortly before noon. He apparently died from a massive skull fracture, but was also stabbed and strangled in what was described as a gangland slaying. This was the first death of the year at San Quentin. Green Eyes was admitted to San Quentin from San Diego on May 8, 1972, to serve 2 consecutive 5-to-life terms for first-degree robbery with use of a firearm. The adjudication of this crime would lead to his death. The details of this murder are documented in my autobiography, which was my first of 7 books I have authored, titled Mexican Mafia, The Gang of Gangs. After my return to San Quentin in 1973, I was approached on the B-section yard by Louis Henry, an inmate from San Diego, who got caught up in the transferring out of several inmates after the murders of 2 rival prison gang members on Christmas Day of 1972. I had been charged with the murder of a rival gang member, but the Monterey County DA refused to prosecute, and many of us wound up back at the queue. Louis from San Diego asked me if someone named Eddie Lopez was a newly made M. Carnal. Except on a need-to-know basis, we typically do not divulge this type of information, and people knew not to ask such sensitive questions. I told him I wasn't sure and asked Louis why he was asking. Louis revealed to me that he and Green Eyes were crime partners in some armed robberies in Chula Vista. After they were arrested, Green Eyes turned state's evidence against him in return for a lighter sentence. This was serious stuff. Knowing he would need proof, I advised Louis not to talk to anyone about this and to produce the court transcripts as soon as possible. All the transferred inmates from Soledad had to wait a few days for our property to arrive from the prison we had been evicted from. When the transcripts arrived, I checked them out, shared them with Chavo Perez from Bakersfield and other carnales housed on the B-section M tier. A short but simple message was sent out to the fellas on the main line, which said, "Thumbs down with Green Eyes." The carnales on the GP yard were surprised and very disappointed with this development. Wero Green Eyes had made a positive impression on them after the following incident. On July 22, 1972, at 12:20 p.m., 3 days after NF member Marcus Castañeda, also known as Tarzan from Pomona, returned to San Quentin on a parole violation, he and fellow NF member Jack Rice were stabbed on the lower yard by Mexican Mafia carnales Huero Green Eyes, Ralph Mata, and Gabby Baeza. All, by the way, were fellow homeboys from Florencia 13. Officers reported Tarzan was bleeding from stab wounds and was rushed to the hospital. Although Green Eyes was the guy responsible for the damage inflicted on Tarzan, that was not going to save him from the M's wrath. The court transcripts were like a harsh and final indictment that Wero Green Eyes was no good. Huero Shy, Davy Perez from San Francisco, and Chente Gutierrez from East Los were given the assignment to take out Green Eyes. They lured him into the showers on the west end of the San Quentin Gymnasium with the offer of shooting some carga, heroin. Huero Shy walked up behind Green Eyes and slipped a rope over his neck, strangling and preventing him from crying out. Davy Perez had hidden a pipe in his waistband and proceeded to bludgeon Green Eyes over the head. Chente completed the job by stabbing him 4 times in the back. In the picture you are viewing, you can see Huero Shy in the upper right-hand corner, circled in blue, flashing the mano negra, and Green Eyes in the lower left-hand corner, circled in red. Like many other prison gang members, Huero Shy had been unleashed to the streets with the passage of SB 42, the Nedgely Bill, introduced by California Senator John A. Nedgely, the chairman of the Select Committee on Penal Institutions. This bill did away with the indeterminate sentencing structure in most instances and replaced it with determinate or fixed sentences. As a result, the CDC began issuing RUAPs, or release upon approval of parole plans. It didn't take long before Huero Shy was back on the hit detail. This time it was on Broadway, a newly parole convicted felon. Mexican Mafia member Bruno Chavez from the Avenues had also paroled due to the Nedgely Bill. Due to some unforgivable internal issues, Bruno received a visit at his place of residence. On February 11, 1977, he was stabbed 12 times in Glasell Park and was sent to Brazil by Huero Shy, who was accompanied by Alfie Sosa, thereby terminating his membership. At the young age of 29, the word was that Bruno was getting tired of all the killings and wanted to stop serving the M, kick back, and live a life of leisure. Retirement was not out of the question for an OG on rare occasions, but such thoughts of walking away from the fellas was against the MS code of conduct that dictated the only way out of the Mariposa was death. Huero Shy would not enjoy his freedom much longer. On February 20th, 1977, Monterey Park police officer Joe Delia performed a traffic stop on a 1975 Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme with M members Alfie Sosa and Armando Mandy Varela on board. Delia requested backup, and fellow officer Robert Moco Morel, who was also a member of the prison gang task force, responded. A .38 caliber revolver was found in the vehicle, and Alfie and Mundy were arrested on suspicion of armed robbery. Amazingly, the .38 turned out to be the murder weapon used in the Sacramento Ellen Delia murder undertaken by Alfie and Sailor Boy Gonzalez on February 17, 1977. Alfie quickly bailed out and fled to Tijuana, Mexico, but Mandy was not so lucky. Over a 2-week period, DEA agent Gilbert Avila, who was also the head of the prison gang task force, with the assistance of M defector Carlos Pieface Ortega, persuaded Mandy to defect from the Mexican Mafia. Mundy began providing details on several mafia executions. On March 3, 1977, because of the information provided by Mundy, 5 Mexican Mafia members and the sister of a Mexican Mafia member were arrested. Michael Delia, Alberto Beto Valles, Manuel Rocky Luna, Edward Sailor Boy Gonzalez, and Anita Talamantes, the sister of Luis Bala Talamantes, were taken into custody. A sixth person arrested was Huero Shy. He was held on a parole violation because a .22 caliber gun was found in his possession at the time of his arrest. Sailor Boy Gonzalez would become the next Mexican Mafia member to defect. Sailor Boy testified before the Los Angeles grand jury, detailing several murders. Sailor testified that the murder of Bruno Chavez was voted on by him and 11 other Mexican Mafia members at the baptism of the daughter of fellow Mexican Mafia member Steve Calote Amador in San Francisco on January 30th, 1977. Sailor further testified that Bruno was killed for not wanting to participate in M business and that Alfie Sosa and Huero Shy were the brothers that conducted the murder on February 11th, 1977. As a result, the grand jury indicted Alfie and Huero Shy of the Bruno Chavez murder on April 21st, 1977. On May the 12th, Alfie and Huero Shy were arraigned on murder and both entered pleas of not guilty. They were ordered to be held without bail until trial set for July 7th. Huero Shy was returned to the CDC for this murder. In CDC, he met a young camarada by the name of Rene Boxer Enriquez, who was also his Artesia homeboy. Huero Shy and Danny Black Dan Varela began mentoring Boxer in preparation for his induction into the Mexican Mafia. The following description of Huero Shy is taken from Boxer's biography written by Chris Blatchford in The Black Hand. I quote, "And then there was Raymond Huero Shy Shryock, whose loyalty and enthusiasm for carrying out the most heinous of crimes had made him a Morgan favorite. A half a dozen years earlier, Huero Shy and 6 other mafiosos were arrested in connection with 10 murders. Boxer estimated, however, that Huero Shy is responsible for as many as 100 hits. Along with Morgan, Huero Shy was one of the few white guys in La M, and many felt that because of that, he killed more readily to prove his worth." And that makes sense. In 1988, Huero Shy was released on parole and back on Broadway after serving about 11 years for the Bruno Chavez murder he and Alfie had committed. Almost a replay of the 1970s when Huero Shy was paroled then, he wasted no time in returning to the hit detail. Like several M members, Huero Shy specialized in murder. On October 15, 1988, the body of Jose Sluggo Pineda was found near the railroad tracks in Hazard Park, just outside of the Ramona housing projects. The fatal wound was a jagged cut to the throat that ran from ear to ear. A fellow Mexican Mafia member who had fallen from grace, the El Paso, Texas native, also suffered multiple stab wounds to the chest, and defensive wounds showed he didn't go easy. According to Boxer's account, this murder was conducted by Huero Shy and an unidentified crime partner. Benjamin Topo Peters placed Pineda on the lista. Topo had arranged for Pineda to live with his mother upon his release on parole. Sluggo and Topo's mother had a falling out, and Topo felt severely disrespected after having done Sluggo a big favor. As a direct result, Sluggo Pineda was sent to Brazil. In 1993, like Peter Sana Ojeda's example in Orange County, the Mexican Mafia initiated an ambitious street campaign to end drive-by gang shootings. This did not mean they were ending violence, but they were changing the rules of engagement. Gang members with a beef against a rival were now required to handle their business face to face. This would avoid collateral damage. By doing this, the big homies reasoned, they would endear themselves to community activists who predictably proceeded to nominate them for sainthood, for saving innocent lives. Anyone with half a brain could assess the M's motivation, and it surely was not benevolence or civic pride, that's for sure. It was a shrewd and calculated way in which to harness and control the street gangs in Los Angeles and Southern California. The next step was to have each gang designate a representative to communicate with the M. Shortly thereafter, the taxing of the gangs by the M began. They called it the program. The photo you are viewing is from a meeting held at Elysian Park near Dodger Stadium on September 18, 1993. Outwardly, the Mexican Mafia propaganda served to the community was they were trying to stop drive-bys to end gang violence. In 1995, Huero Shy and Chuco Castro met with a Long Beach newspaper reporter to try and convince him of the prison gang's good intentions. Huero Shy was heard on a recording that was made at the meeting saying, "I support ending the drive-bys to stop needless violence in parts of Los Angeles." He even offered to travel to schools to speak out against gang violence. The portrayal of gangsters as community activists is straight out of the mobster playbook. In an attempt to portray Huero Shy as a man against violence, this tape was presented and played at the 1997 federal RICO racketeering trial by defense attorney J.T. Lichtman. But before we jump too far ahead, let's address the elephant in the room, the Maxson Road murders. On Saturday, April 22, 1995, between 10 and 10:30 p.m., 3 adults, Anthony Dito Moreno, his sister Maria Moreno, and Gustavo Tito Aguirre, and 2 of Maria's children, 5-year-old Laura Moreno and 6-month-old Ambrose Padilla, were shot to death in a house located at 3843 Maxson Road in El Monte, California. Richard Primo Valdez, a Sangra street gang member, shot and killed Anthony Moreno and Gustavo Aguirre, while his fellow Sangra gang member Jimmy Character Palma shot and killed Maria Moreno, the sister, and the children. Sangra gang members Danny Tricky Logan and Anthony Scar Torres were also co-conspirators serving in a lesser capacity. The hit team was sent by Luis Pelon Maciel from El Monte Flores, a newly made Mexican Mafia member sponsored by Huero Shy. The main target was Anthony Moreno, also known as Dito, from El Monte. Dito was a Mexican Mafia dropout who was collecting drug taxes without M.E. permission. At the end of the day, it was determined by the fellas that Dito had to go, and Huero Shy, after successfully lobbying for and having Pelon recruited, assigned the hit to his protege, Pelon Maciel. The picture you are viewing was taken in the mid-1970s, 2 decades prior, at San Quentin. The 3 men in the front, flashing the black hand, are Mexican Mafia members Benny Romero from Casablanca in Riverside County, Marcelo Gabi Baeza, a.k.a. Pistolero from Florencia 13, and Richard Richie Jaramillo from Pomona, by way of New Mexico. The individual standing on the far right in the back row is a young Dito Moreno, who was then a camarada at this point and was being groomed for membership into La Mariposa. Collateral damage can be explained and justified if the victims are adult eyewitnesses, but, in my educated opinion, knowing the Mexican Mafia's attitude and criminal practices regarding children and innocents, Shai would never order, nor did he expect the 2 children to be murdered. This was a definite no-no and against the Mexican Mafia's code of conduct. As a result of this unforgivable act, not to mention it made the fellas look like baby killers, Jimmy Character Palma was murdered on the Death Row Adjustment Center yard on October 13, 1999, for his 1997 transgression in El Monte. An interesting side note, although he was never prosecuted, the word in the gang underworld is that Stranger Cherzak from Rockwood, an ex-Mexican Mafia member, was the man who sent word to the MM members on death row to have Character sent to Brazil. After Character was murdered, Pelon Maciel wasted no time entering protective custody. He understandably feared the same fate. Another side note, on November 5, 1993, Ernest Chuco Castro from Barrio Nuevo began to cooperate with law enforcement after facing the prospect of a long prison sentence following a raid on his home. He would work for 2 years as an embedded undercover informant, setting up meetings in different hotels and allowing law enforcement to record these meetings. The induction of Luis Pelon Maciel, also taken from one of Chuco's setups, and you just saw a portion of this on the previous clip, plus the politicking that took place beforehand regarding the issue of the books being closed, was all captured on the videotape. This led to a federal racketeering indictment that was unsealed on May 1st, 1995. 22 Mexican Mafia members and associates were charged with crimes ranging from murder, assaults, extortion, conspiracy, and narcotics trafficking. Unfortunately for 43-year-old Huero Shy, he was taken down in the dragnet the weekend before the indictment was unsealed. On May 30th, 1997, Huero Shy was convicted of violations of RICO, conspiracy to violate RICO, conspiracy to aid in the distribution of drugs, guilty of murder of a Chino gang member, attempted murder of 2 other Chino gang members, and conspiracy to kill 2 LA gang members. Huero Shy is serving a federal life sentence without the possibility of parole. He is currently housed at the ADX Supermax facility in Florence, Colorado, at the current age of 72. As I have said in other videos and will continue to remind you all, there is no pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, or retirement at the end of your career. No, sir, there is just a cement box waiting for a lifetime of incarceration. Don't blame your unlucky stars, the vato or vatos that gave you up, or that the moon and the stars were not in alignment. Blame yourself. Or there is a hole in the ground 6 feet under, a one-way ticket to Brazil, as we used to say. So please take this into consideration before becoming seriously involved in that life for the duration of your life. Buenas noches, good night, and God bless you.